So I kindly request our speaker today, Managing Director of Menon and Menon Limited, Kolhapur, Mr. Vijay Menon. Please start with the session.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be here among familiar faces. You know, when I look around, I see a lot of IIF members, foundrymen here. And as always, you know, in Marathi you say Samadukhi. Being with people who share the same pains, being with them is a big opportunity. And I thank IIF Kolhapur Chapter. I thank Sachin, for giving me this opportunity to be here with all of you today. Digitalization is a very widely used and a very widely misused terminology. People look at digitalization as a solution for all their problems. They look at it as, get digitalization, all your problems are behind you. So, in effect, what is going to happen is, over the course of this conference, a lot of people will understand what digitalization is, what it can do, and most importantly, what it cannot do. You know, we need to understand what things can happen with digitalization and what cannot happen with digitalization. That is, I think, the takeaway after this conference, hopefully, the takeaway after this conference. Now, when we look at digitalization, we can look at digitalization from different perspectives. You know, we can look at digitalization from a technology perspective. A technology perspective is when you look at the computer hardware, look at computer software, look at sensors, look at the protocol, the communication protocol between sensors, look at algorithms. This would be a technical way of looking at digitalization. Another way of looking at digitalization is from a process perspective, where somebody could come and lay down a step-by-step guide towards how digitalization can be implemented in your organization. That would be the process perspective. The third perspective would be the management perspective. That means, how could I leverage the capabilities of digitalization to achieve the goals of the organization? How can I leverage the capabilities of digitalization to achieve the goals of the organization? And that is the perspective that I'll be following up through this discussion that we'll have. Now, digitalization, you know, when we look at this, before we start, let us look at what are the goals of what can be possibly the goals of an organization. According to me, the most important goal for an organization is to stay ahead of competition at all times. There is no greater goal than staying ahead of competition at all times. That is the goal of the organization, according to me. And so important is this thought that there is a gentleman called Professor Benjamin Graham. He's supposed to be the father of modern investment in the world. He has written a book called The Intelligent Investor, which is supposed to be the Bible for professional investors in the world. If you want to be a professional investor, you have to read, you have to understand that book called The Intelligent Investor. In that book, he says that, very rarely does he invest in a company unless he meets personally with the management of the company. And when he goes to meet the management of the company, he has a full set of questions with him, a full set of questions. And among those questions, the most important question is on which he would take the investment decision. Most important question is what is your organization doing today that your competitors have not started doing yet? See, the question again is, what is your organization doing today which your competitors have not started doing yet? In a nutshell, what it means is you're doing something today, it is giving you advantage, your competitors have not started doing the thing, later on they realize that this is something that is giving somebody else the advantage, they start doing it. So till the time the competitors start doing this particular thing, this company gets a competitive advantage. And that is something that this man looks for. Before investing in a company, he looks for that competitive advantage. How are you better than your competitors? So to my mind, all this digitalization, everything that we do should be aimed towards making ourselves better than competition. Okay. Now, having said that, let's look at this particular perspective of, this better than competition. That thought, that was important during the analog era, that is important during the digital era, and will continue to be important right through forever, let's say, being better than competition. Then let's look at what happens in the analog era. In the analog era, what used to happen was data would be collected by human beings and noted on pieces of paper, be it sales, be it consumption, be it pressure, be it temperature. All these variables that a factory throws up is recorded on pieces of paper. Those people, that piece of paper, that information is collated, compiled, organized in such a fashion that a human being is able to make sense of it, and he takes a decision. That decision, the quality of the decision depends on the quality of the data, the quality of the compilation, the quality of the organization, the quality of the man interpreting the data. On that depended the quality of the decision. Okay. Now, we all know that the human mind has limitations on the number of variables that you can simultaneously handle. There are limitations. Human mind is a very, very powerful tool, but the limitation is it cannot handle a large number of variables. So, when computerization happened, when people realized that decisions taken based on a basic number crunching done by computers tended to be better than the earlier one, that is when digitalization started. That was the first step in the digitalization process. Okay. Now, when the digitalization process started, the first thing was you have data in analog form, you have a computer which requires digital data. So the requirement was this analog data had to be converted into digital data for the computer. So there came a data entry operator. If you've noticed in your companies at some point of time behind, what we used to have was we used to have employees called data entry operators. What they effectively did was non-value adding activity. What they did was they convert analog data and put it into a computer for digital analysis. So that data entry operator. So the data entry operator then being a non-value adding activity was looked at very as something that had to be done away with. So when sensors became more capable, the sensors started then corresponding with the computer system and passing on data directly to the computer system so that the data entry operation was more or less eliminated. Later on, the sensors started becoming so powerful that these sensors were able to communicate with one another. These sensors were able to communicate with one another so that the overall process parameters were achieved. See, the process parameters in a functioning company, something is up, something is down. So to compensate for that, something else, some other sensor had to be triggered. So this sensors started operating together and adjusting themselves to ensure that the pre-decided operating parameters were achieved so that the quality goals, the production goals were achieved. So this phase could be called the machine learning phase. Later on, these sensors became more complex, more capable. The computer programs became more capable. The hardware became better. Algorithms came up, wherein based on past data, the computer system, the algorithms could suggest ways to make it, to go beyond the defined process parameters to make the process better. See, the human beings have designed a process for certain efficiency, for certain output. The algorithms are going to suggest ways it can be made better. And that became the beginning of an artificial intelligence. A further intelligence which is beyond human thought came in, and that became the beginning of artificial intelligence. And that is progressing, it continues to progress over a period of time. Now all this requires digital data as its input. So in a broad framework, we could call this the era of digitalization. See, I thought I should just put this whole thing into perspective, because being the first speaker, I thought as my responsibility to talk of the whole thing and put the whole thing into a very basic layman's perspective of what digitalization is and what it is. Okay. Then when it comes to digitalization, the question is, the topic of my discussion, what I would like to discuss about is, how can digitalization be used to further the goals of the company, to achieve the goals of the company? That is the topic for my discussion. Now, as I said, the goal of the organization is to stay ahead of competition. The goal of the organization is to stay ahead of competition. Now, personally, instead of laying down set of points, making it a very theoretical kind of exercise, I thought I'll place before you a case study. I'll place before you a case study of a company, Indian company, started very small as a startup during the analog era. They had very large multinational competitors, people as competitors, multinational companies as competitors. And in a span of 25 years, they become the largest company in its category in India. Later on, digitalization happened. This company embraced digitalization in its full effect. And I'm very happy to say that this company a few years ago became the second largest in terms of value, second most valuable company in the world in terms of valuation in this category. So I thought I'll give you, and the most important thing is, this is an Indian company operating in an Indian context, a context in which all you and me, all of us are operating in this context. They had multinationals as competitors, and they beat them, and they become globally valuable, the second most valuable in the world. So I thought that is a case study which I can talk of to understand how the transition happened from an analog era, how they succeeded in an analog era, how they absorbed the technologies that came up during the digital era and achieved the success that they had. So I thought my bulk of my speech today would be devoted towards discussing this particular case. I thought that was a good way to put across things, and which puts everything into a very practical perspective. Okay, now let's come to that. The name of the company, any guess? It's Asian Paints. Asian Paints, a company so good. As I was doing a lot of reading about Asian Paints, I was very proud that a company like this started in India. See, let's trace that company a little bit. Let's understand the company a little bit. And I only feel that I should be able to do justice to whatever they've done. That is the only feeling I have. See, this company started, let's say before that, during the World War II, the British government decides to ban import of paints into the country. They wanted to focus on the war effort. They decide to ban import of paint into the country. So these 4 small promoters, very young promoters, they say this is an opportunity. Let us study the opportunity. They looked at it as a paint industry, as an industry, let us study the opportunity. And when they studied, they found that this paint industry was dominated by large multinational companies. The paint industry was dominated by companies like ICI, Goodless Walls. Now it became Goodless Nerolec. It was that time called Goodless Walls. Jensen Nicholson. All multinational companies, large companies, dominated by them. But then when they went deeper into the subject, they realized that these companies were focusing on the marine end of the business, industrial end of the business, and they were neglecting the decorative home segment. So they said, right opportunity, a right thing, where these multinationals are not operating, let us get into that segment. And in 1942, they formed this small company in Bandu. Small means small, the smallest possible element, a startup in Bandu. Okay, they started this company in 1942. Then they realized that in India is a land of festivals. At any given point of time, there are festivals in different parts of the country. Today, there will be a festival somewhere in some part of India. And during times of festival, a poor farmer would like to at least paint his house. If not, he doesn't have money to paint the house, at least the living room, the front room. If not, at least the front door, he would like to paint. Then certain parts, different customs at different parts, certain places they said, this particular, in Tamil Nadu, I believe, there is a tradition that horns of cattle are painted. And most of these are very large, very bright colors, required in very small quantities. So Asian Paints developed paint made very cheap because they wanted to cater to these kinds of people. And they sold these things to these people, and very soon they started selling in large numbers. At this point of time, probably the multinationals would have looked around and said, "Arey, here's some small company trying to grow business." But because they had taken a decision to sell it cheap, the multinational said, "It's a small company, let them do it. We are not bothered about it. Let him do whatever he wants there. We will neglect them." So they became more or less, they became monopolies in this rural area. The rural area, they saturated the rural area, they marketed, they became fairly big in that area. Then they thought they should focus on the urban market. Look how the mind works. Always looking at niches. This is all in the analog age. Always looking at niches, trying to fill those gaps. They looked at the urban thing to find out a similar gap. In the urban area, they found that this particular paint industry, dominated by multinationals, were focusing more on the very expensive plastic emulsion paints. While the low end of the paint, the chuna, the dry distemper paint, was what these small companies were handling. So they said they'll do our R&D work and cater to something in between, not as expensive as plastic emulsion, but not as cheap as this, but something that they can be positioned in between, and they called it the washable distemper thing. The washable distemper, because it met a real requirement, also started clicking, also started doing very well. And a small paint company, they established themselves in the rural segment, established themselves in the urban segment. Then they realized that we are a company, we are dealing with multinationals, we need to have a brand. We need to have image. They contacted R.K. Lakshman at that time and requested him to design a mascot for them. If you remember the Asian Paints mascot of a mischievous boy, paintbrush in his hand, a small can of paint by the side. If you remember that, I don't know, all of you old enough or young enough to know that. Yeah, but But that became the mascot of Asian Paints. They developed a brand, they developed an image, and to such an extent, before even the multinational realized that these people had gone very far, they already by 67, 25 years after they started, they became the largest paint company in India. They became the largest. But by far, because they wanted to sell it cheap, they were not the most profitable. They were very low profitable company, but large volumes. Okay, this is 1967. Computerization happened worldwide in the 1970s, early 70s, 70 let's say. That's when the first mainframe computers started coming. Now, these people were so far looking at improving their profit margins, looking internally, looking at improving profit margins, that's what they were doing. But when computerization happened, they became the first company in India to import a mainframe computer at a time when Western companies were also playing with the same thought. They were ahead of Tatas, they were ahead of the research establishments, ahead of IITs, ahead of large public sector undertakings. They were the first ones to bring the computer here. Another difference, all these companies abroad were using computers for payroll, administrative purposes, save manpower. That was the objective. But these people didn't use that. They said, we'll use this computer for forecasting. We'll use this computer for minimizing our cost structure. See, at that point of time, the distribution network for a paint industry was the paint manufacturer made it, it went to a wholesaler, then it went to a distributor, then it went to the dealer for ultimate sale. What these people did, and they were not able to deal directly with the dealers because humanly it is not possible to bill so many people. They had 30,000 dealers at that time. 30,000 invoices is not possible. So what they did was, using this mainframe computer, they started dealing directly with dealers. They cut out the wholesaler, cut out the distributor, cut out their margins, retained their margins, improved their profitability. Inventories in the pipeline came down. Again, savings in cost. So the problem that they had less profitability slowly started getting addressed. Thereafter, once they realized, and a big advantage of that also was they went closer to the customers. They were able to understand what their customers really wanted so that the product strategies can also be worked around that. Okay, now, when they worked on this particular thing, the next phase, they said, having got success in this field, they said, we'll roll out computers from end to end. Now, what this happened is not one step after the other. I'm trying to put together 4 or 5 things that happened over a period of time, disconnected, but for the sake of discussion, I'll be putting them one after the other here for you. See, they had very close proximity, they were very close to the customer. When they were very close to the customer, they said they were able to get very good quality prediction of demand forecasting. Over a period of time, they improved their demand forecasting. When the demand forecasting improved, what they did was they started manufacturing in the plant to demand, not for inventory. Look at that, manufacturing for demand, for inventory, inventories came down, inventories were slashed. And as we all as manufacturers know, when inventory comes down, a lot of bottlenecks in the manufacturing plant start surfacing, and step by step, when bottlenecks come up, they are addressed. So operations also became more efficient. Demand forecasting happened. Then they were manufacturing to demand. What they did later on was, they were the first company to get benefits, to eliminate the inefficiencies from the warehousing, distribution, and retrieval, storage and retrieval systems. They added robotic storage and retrieval systems to eliminate, inefficiencies in the storage and retrieval systems. They brought in GPS-based tracking of of equipments of their last mile delivery buses to ensure that there is no inefficiency in the distribution network, in the last mile delivery network. It's such a good thing, and they worked on it. And also the distribution networks were lined up. They looked at all that particular thing, and then they did was, when the power of the internet came up, what they did was they started asking dealers to use their website for order placement, use their website for payment processing. This is much before all of us could dream of that particular thought. And when the norm at that time was from manufacturer to dealer, lump 1 month shipments were given. These people came down to 5-6 shipments a day. They were billing 5-6 shipments a day. That means 5-6 small shipments means, look at what happens to the inventory. They brought down inventory that much. So every step in the process, they brought down inventory, they improved their cost, and slowly with this what happened was, they became one of the most profitable paint companies in the world. They also, I won't think they went into artificial intelligence, they went into various other things to really further their. So the gist of what I'm trying to say is, they used computerization to drive all these advantages. They became the most profitable company in the world also, and with the result that a few years ago, they became the second most valuable company in the world. The second most valuable company in the world. They were not the largest paint company in the world. They were the 10th largest paint company in the world. But they became the second largest paint company in the world. Now, the second most valuable paint company in the world. Now, valuation is a shareholder perception. Valuation is a shareholder perception. How a shareholder perceives the future of this company, what is the growth rate like, what are the company's capabilities of scaling up, product pipeline like. These are all factors that people consider to value a company. Even though they were the 10th largest company in the world, they became the second most valuable company in the world. Okay. At this point of time, I'll give you a small statistic. If you look at the largest paint company in the world, is a company called Sherwin-Williams. It's based in the US. This Sherwin-Williams has a profit margin of 9%. Asian Paints has a profit margin of 12%. The margins are higher. Sherwin-Williams has a debt to equity ratio of 4.77, highly indebted company, 4.77, while Asian Paints had a debt equity of 0.06. Last year, Sherwin-Williams grew at a rate of 6%. Last year, Asian Paints grew at 34%. See, so my thinking is, the way the street believes that this company founded in 42, in 25 years it becomes the most profitable, the largest company in India. In 75 years it becomes the second most valuable company in India. And we are all pretty sure before they reach 100, they'll be the most valuable paint company in the world. This company operating in India in conditions similar to what you are facing and what I am facing, overcame all that to establish this. I think that should be a benchmark for us. That should be what we do as a company. We should set up this benchmark is something that we have to work on. So today, let us look at learnings. What can we learn from them? There are a lot of things. If they have done this, there's something learning for us. The learning is, they never approached digitalization as a tool, as a means. Sorry, again, not digitalization as the end. They looked at digitalization as a means towards the end, as a tool. They said they want to be better than competition. Digitalization helped them become better than competition, adopted it. Probably they didn't even know this term digitalization existed. But they adopted it because this technology would give them advantage. They got into niche products, priced them very, very, very aggressively, so that the competitors would not come in. They would have a monopolistic run. Looked inward, reduced cost, improved capabilities, improved service, brought better products, so that the gap between them and their competitors increased. And that gave them considerable advantage. So it is a very strategic thinking on their part, and continued for 75 years, will continue again for some time, and this is a very, very good success story, an Indian success story that we should talk of. So now the last part of what I would like to say is, how do we as companies look at this whole thing? We are foundrymen, we are into business. How do we, the subject that I want is, how do we benefit from this digitalization effort? So far we've heard how others have done it. What can we do? See, we are today selling something. That means somebody is buying. Which means there is something of value that you are giving which your customer is appreciating. Otherwise, he'll always go next door and buy something. Don't underestimate yourself. There is something of value that you're doing. You're all selling here, selling to someone, and that someone is benefiting from your sale. Let us try to understand what is it that that customer wants. What is it that that customer likes in the organization? Is it your delivery? Is it your quality? Is it your relationship? Is it your packaging? Is it your timeliness? Whatever. There are things that their response. So these are things that you have as a customer. As a customer, you as a supplier, you have certain advantages. Let us note that. Look around you, competitors. Who are your competitors? What are they doing? What are they doing which basically can be, you can do better? What are they doing, what can be done by you? So you are looking at your competitors. Then you need to also look at a long-term strategy in terms of what should be my goal 5 years, 10 years down the line. Make a longer-term strategy, 5 years, 10 years down the line, what should I do? What kind of business should I be in? What kind of thing? What kind of advantages can you build in? Because these advantages are not something that you can build in over 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. You can't do that. It's a longer-term exercise. You spend 4, 5 years, 6 years. It's a lifetime achievement. You have to work on that. Do that. And then use digitalized tools. By that time, probably if new technologies come up, use those tools. Use the most modern tools to drive home the advantage to become better than your competitors. And once you have become better than your competitors, enlarge the moat. As Warren Buffett would said, have a moat around you and make that moat larger and larger. So probably when we look at digitalization, don't look digitalization as one computer, when you look at all that, we will get lost in the technology. We are all engineers, and very easily we can get lost in technology. We are all engineers. We get lost in technology. Let us not get lost in technology. Let's keep that objective. We want to be better than competitors. And at whatever cost. Let us list out the points. Let's make a plan, and let us achieve it. I don't know whether I've been able to do justice to what Asian Paints have done, but in a nutshell, when I was reading this, I was very, very thrilled about this, especially because it was an Indian company doing it. Had I read about Microsoft doing it or Google doing it, that thrill would not have been there. Somebody with our DNA, somebody in our country, somebody facing the same challenges, did this. Amazing. And 75 years is 3 generations. It was not just 1 generation, 3 generations so far, and by the time they become the most valuable, it will be the fourth generation. So 4 generations of work has gone into it. So amazing. So I would like to leave you with that thought. And once again, did I overstep my time? Once again, I thank you, thank Sachin, thank IIF, Western Region, IIF Kolhapur Chapter for giving me this opportunity to share my views with you. These are some things I thought was very, very important from my perspective. I don't know how much of you share my views. Thank you. Thank you.
Check, one, check, hello. Hello.
Now I request our session chairman, Mr. Prasad Mantri, to felicitate our guest, Mr. Vijay Menon, Managing Director of Menon and Menon Limited, Kolhapur.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can I have one last, not question, Mr. Menon? Sir, here, on this side, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You had given a very nice example of Asian Paints. I must appreciate that, being an Indian company. Myself, Sushil Sharma, Shamlex Nagpur, Technical Director. Sir, you made a point of Asian Paints giving such innovative solutions. I hope all of you must be aware that it was the Asian Paints only which came out with a concept of giving the right shade of the company at the dealer itself. And the consumer itself can have the shade of the paint. And that was one of the biggest example of the digitization what Asian Paints had introduced that time.
Yes, yes. You know, that's a point when I spoke extempore, I think that point was left out.
So
See, this is
that company was the
so
first one.
This is called computerized tinting.
Yeah.
Computerized tinting had a very big advantage. Computerized tinting was when earlier, if you want a shade, that shade would go and it will take about 6 weeks before the company came back with the shade, what you wanted. When the computerized tinting happened in the US or wherever, they brought everything in, they gave their dealers, they financed their dealers. So what took 6 weeks, they were able to do in a few hours. Now the advantage is the customer gets it very fast, one big advantage. The second big advantage is, when you say computer tinting, you are dealing with only 4 basic colors.
Very true.
Any tint, any color in this world can be made from these 4 basic colors. And if you have these 4 basic colors, and if you can make any tint you want, what is the inventory level? The inventory level is fantastic.
Drastically
So
reduced.
I'm sorry I've missed that point, but that is a very important point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.